Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to the very first juniors baking video ever since we have gone online. Now today we're actually going to make homemade butter biscuits, and I'm really hoping that as you watch this video you are actually following along with me so that we can kind of do this together. So what I've done is I've put all of my ingredients that I need out on the table so that I can just grab them quickly. It just makes things a little bit more efficient. The first thing I need you to do is obviously wash your hands. That is the number one thing you always do first. The second thing you want to do ahead of time before you start baking is preheat your oven to 425 degrees. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to grab a cookie sheet and you're going to want to lightly grease that with Pam or anything that you have in your house that would work for that. Now, please bear with me as this is the very first baking video, and I'm really hoping that you're going to follow along with me as we go. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is combine our flour, baking powder, sugar, and salt in a large bowl. So we're going to take 2 cups of flour. When I measure my flour, I always use a spoon to scoop into my measuring cup. That's really important to avoid air bubbles so that you get the exact amount of flour. I'm going to then take a knife and I'm just going to flatten the top. That's my first cup. Second cup, same thing. I will try and go slow so that you can follow along with me, but feel free to pause the video anytime if I'm going a little bit too fast. Nice and flat there. Okay, so there's my 2 cups of flour. I always follow a recipe and I'm trying to be exact as possible as well while I'm doing this. Baking powder, 1 tablespoon of baking powder. So I've got my baking powder here. Just gonna 1 tablespoon of baking powder. This is really important to level off as well, because you don't want to add too much baking powder or too little. So my container, I just kind of leveled it off with my container, but if you don't have a container that does that, you can also use a knife for that as well. So we're going to add that. Next, we are going to add our sugar, and there's only 1 tablespoon of sugar. So this is where I'm actually going to use my knife to level this off. This recipe is really nice because there's actually only, I think, 6 ingredients total. So it's super simple. Okay, next we're going to add the salt. 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to grab that. Hopefully you're following along with me. Again, pause the video at any time if I'm going too fast. So you're going to add your salt. Remember, I did level that off. It's really important that you do that because you don't want to add too much salt. Okay, so that's all the ingredients that we need in this bowl right now. So I'm just going to mix it up. And for me personally, I like to use a whisk when I'm whisking the dry ingredients. I just feel like it does a more thorough job of mixing them all together. So we're just going to do that. Until you feel like it is all incorporated here. I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, so the next part is pretty fun. This is where you get to actually cut in your butter with a pastry cutter. Now this recipe calls for 6 tablespoons. Now depending on what kind of butter you buy, it might be kind of hard to judge how much butter you're actually putting in. Mine here, if you can see, I have little sticks of butter. This stick as a whole is half a cup, and it actually has labeled each tablespoon for me. And I've just kind of drawn in the lines where I can't see the tablespoon label. So I'd say your best judgment might be to kind of eyeball it, but you want to try and get butter that has some sort of measurement on the side to make it easier for you. So I have made a large indent on where I need to cut. Where's my 6 tablespoons? And it's about there. So before you add the butter, it's really important that you don't just add this whole stick in, because that's gonna make it really difficult as you're trying to cut in your butter. So I like to cut mine into little cubes almost first, and then add them in like that. Now, you may find that you need a little bit more butter as you're cutting in your butter, and that's totally okay. Just kind of use your judgment. Now, we're gonna actually use one of these, so hopefully you have one of these at home. This works the best. Some people use knives, but I think this works really well. So we're actually just going to press down like that. And I like to do a little press and twist. That's just my preference. And as you feel the butter getting stuck in the pastry cutter, you're going to take the knife that you cut your butter with, and you're actually just gonna run your knife along your pastry cutter to get the butter off. And then you actually are going to repeat this process for quite some time. It's very time consuming. But what's really important here is that you want the butter to be incorporated as much as possible. And you almost want it to look like coarse crumbs. So you're gonna be doing this for quite some time, maybe a few minutes. That's looking good so far. I'm gonna run my knife again one more time. So we're getting there. Oops. So it's starting to go down into coarse crumbs. Hopefully you can see this. So that's actually looking really good. It actually didn't take me as long as I thought. Hopefully you can kind of see in my bowl what this looks like. You will have a little bit of butter chunks, but that's kind of exactly how you want it to look. Next, we're gonna add in our 3/4 cups of milk. So I have a liquid measuring cup here, and I'm gonna actually measure it just till the 3/4. Just like that. And I'm gonna pour that in my bowl with my flour. This time I am gonna use a wooden spoon to mix this together. This is where you are hopefully going to form a dough. Now, it's important to know that when you're making biscuits, sometimes you need more flour and sometimes you're gonna need more liquid. And it's okay to add a little bit more flour if your dough is too wet, and it's okay to add more liquid, more milk, if your dough is too dry. Now, as I'm mixing, I am getting to the point where it's forming a dough, and it actually looks pretty good. Now, I am gonna get to the point where I'm gonna need to go in here with my hands And this is where it's gonna get a little messy. So I'm gonna go in and just gently press down on my dough. I want to get all of the dough out of the bowl as possible. You don't want to waste it. Okay, so as you keep pressing with your hands, you should have something that looks like this, that looks like a really nice dough. Now, once you have that, you're gonna take it out of your bowl and just set your bowl aside. Okay, so it's really important that before you do the next step, that you take just a little bit of flour. Flour your counter, just a little bit there. So now I have my dough, nice and simple, just like that. So I like to use a rolling pin when I do this, just because I feel like it's a little bit easier. So you're gonna roll out your dough until about 1 inch thickness, about that big. Now, when I'm rolling, I like to start in the middle, pull out, in the middle, push forward, in the middle, pull out, in the middle, push forward. And I'm just gonna kind of do that all around until I feel like I have it so that it's about 1 inch thick. Now, that was pretty quick. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm actually going to grab my pan that I have greased ahead of time. And this is when we get to actually make our biscuits. Now, the recipe itself calls for a biscuit cutter, but anything that's round will work. So for me, I just have a glass, and you don't want it to be overly wide, but not too skinny either. And this recipe should actually make at least 6 biscuits. So once you have it cut out, you're gonna place it on your pan. And you want to try and cut out your dough as close to each other as possible so that you can get as many biscuits out of this dough as you can. It's looking good so far. Again, feel free to pause the video if I'm going too fast. These biscuits will go great with soup, for dinner, or anything really. I'm gonna try and get one more biscuit out of here. Don't have a whole lot of room on the end there. Awesome, so that's 6 right there. So if you have a little bit of extra dough here, it's important to actually rework the dough. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just going to knead it slightly. And I'm gonna add a little bit more flour to my counter. Okay. Flatten it with my hand a little bit. I might not need to roll it out as much as before. Perfect. Wow, I actually might need a second pan. This is making more biscuits than I thought, which is fantastic. Biscuits can go pretty close to each other. They're not like cookies that are going to stick together very much. So you could add quite a bit on a pan and you should be fine. Now I just have this little piece of dough here. I just reworked it a little bit. and I'm probably just gonna get one more biscuit out of this. Awesome. All right. So now I have all my biscuits on my pan, and they're almost ready to go in the oven. Now, this is something that personally I like to do. So what I've done ahead of time is I have made an egg and milk wash. So what this is it's just one egg and a little splash of milk. Now, again, this is just something that I like to do. You don't have to do this, but I like that what it does is it makes your biscuits nice and golden brown on the top. So I just have a little pastry brush here. I'm just gonna take a little bit and brush it on the top of each biscuit. Just like that. You wanna be careful not to put on too much. You don't want to completely soak your biscuits. Just like that. I hope that you're finding this recipe pretty easy so far. The reason I chose it is because it is only 6 ingredients and it actually is relatively quick to do. And pretty easy, I think. You'll have to send me pictures or post pictures on our YouTube channel of how they turned out. Okay. So I've brushed every single one of my biscuits and now they're actually ready to go into the oven. So according to your recipe, they're gonna go in for about 12 minutes. Another good way to judge whether they're done or not is if they are brown on top. And you want them to be slightly golden brown on the top. And that's what I love about this egg wash, is it really does that nicely. So that's how you make the biscuits, and I'll try and pop back on to show you a final product picture of how mine turned out, and hopefully I can see the same from you. And thanks for tuning in, and next week there will be a different video, whether it's baking, crafts, cooking. We will have something fun for you to do. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.